It is now 89 seconds to midnight. This is the closest the world has ever been to midnight.
The Doomsday Clock, 89 seconds to midnight. Interesting. In 1 Timothy chapter 4, it says, "Now the Spirit expressly says that in latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons." Now, these people who depart from the faith are those that John talks about, where he says they went out from us, but they were not of us. That is important to recognize. These people do not lose their salvation. That is not possible. But in verse 2, it goes on and it says, "Speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron." If you click on that word in the Blue Letter Bible, it brings you down to this word, which is to carterize. So these people are carterizing their own conscience. When we couple that idea that Paul is talking about in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and we go to Ephesians chapter 4, Paul again says, "This I say therefore and testify in the Lord that you shall no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk in futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart, who being past feeling have given themselves over to lewdness, to work all uncleanness and greediness." Now there's a lot to talk about here, so let's unpack it. Here in verse 19 it says, "being past feeling." If you click on that word in the Blue Letter Bible, it goes down and it tells you to become callous, insensible to pain, apathetic. But callousness is the idea that I want you to walk away from with this. Something I also want you to walk away from with this is to understand that they gave themselves over to lewdness. These people were giving themselves over to lewdness. So how does this apply to the Doomsday Clock being 89 seconds away from midnight? Well, the reason why I think it's important to talk about this is because in 1 Timothy and in Ephesians, Paul is the author of both of those epistles. But in 1 Timothy, Paul is addressing the doctrines that were coming from false teachers and from false prophets and pastors. And so what he's actually talking about there is those false teachers and those false pastors and whatnot, those people were giving themselves over to the incorrect doctrine. Now, the interesting thing about that is that they heard what it was, the correct doctrine, they heard it. But over time, even though the more they heard it, they just kept on rejecting it little by little by little by little. So I want you to imagine you have a scar, and then I want you to put another scar on top of that scar, and then another scar on top of that scar, and little by little, that's just deadness, just growing on top of one another. That's basically what those people were doing back then. If you imagine the Pharisees, the people who were so just orthodox, that they were such in a rebellion kind of lifestyle that they heard Jesus, they heard everything he was saying, and they would not change. And so that is deadness on top of deadness, 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 scar on top of scar on top of scar. And that's the idea of what's going on in 1 Timothy. But then in Ephesians chapter 4, where we were just reading, Paul is addressing the normal people. He's not talking about the pastors. He's not talking about the teachers that were giving the false doctrine like what he was addressing in 1 Timothy. Here in Ephesians chapter 4, he's talking about just the normal people. He's talking about the rest of the Gentiles who walk in futility of their mind, and it goes on. He's just talking about the normal person. And so here in Ephesians chapter 4, he's talking about how they are past feeling. So the people, the Gentiles, were past feeling. They were calloused over from the truth of the Lord. And so that's really fascinating, because when you look back at 1 Timothy, what that word was carterize. And so here, this word is calloused. So you have a carterization and people being calloused over. So it's really interesting to compare the two. But basically, what I want you to pay attention to is this is how our world is. It's just overflowing with all of this. It's all over the place. And the way that this ties back into the Doomsday Clock is this. The way that this is applicable in our life right now is that back during their time, 2,000 years ago, it would take somebody a long time to be calloused over. It would take little by little by little by little, and over a couple decades they might become hardened, and they might harden their hearts toward the Lord. But what's interesting about our time today is that's completely different to how it was back then. And the reason why it's different is because of technology. An example of this is you and I go see a movie. I see it, and then you see it 2 weeks later, and we both have seen the same thing. Or you watch a TV show in your house, and I watch the same thing in my house. We're both paying attention to the same thing. But what we're learning inadvertently is that we are being told how to respond to certain crises in our own lives. For example, if you are in a relationship and your boyfriend breaks up with you, girlfriend breaks up with you, husband, wife, whatever, you and I have been taught by social media on how to respond. And so what that response is, the worldly response, is teaching us to be very hateful and angry and upset and throw things across the room. And it's the complete antithesis of what the Bible teaches. And so it's really good to recognize that when we watch something, we are in fact being programmed to respond in a certain kind of manner. And this is why Christians are supposed to be different than the rest of the world. But this is what you are seeing a lack of in our world here in 2025. Today, when you look around the world, what you see is the Christians are almost undiscernible. You can't tell which one is a Christian and which one is a Christian. They look the same. And that is a Laodicean world. I believe we are living in the Laodicean church right now. And that is a picture of it. You just see a whole bunch of Christians who don't know much of anything about the Bible. And so it's a whole bunch of little infants in a roundabout way, just all crawling around and not really doing anything. And so it's kind of like the church has lost its usefulness. My point here is that what used to take a long time back here for them to get to the point to where they have been past feeling, in our world today, it is now just on super speed to reach that point because everybody is connected. Now I see somebody on social media respond in this kind of manner, and so since I saw that person and that person's an influencer, that must mean that's how I need to react as well. And so then I just get all calloused over and I cauterize my heart at a rapid pace, whereas before it didn't used to be that way. So these people back in 1 Timothy 4 who depart from the faith because they give heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, these doctrines of demons have been around forever, but now they are just on overdrive and just blasted out into the world right now at an unprecedented level. And so people are trying to figure out what is the right way to go, which way's up, which way's down. And it's really difficult to do, but this is why it's important for you to know your stuff. Because if you know the word, then you'll be able to navigate life when times get hard. In Daniel 12, verse 4, it says, "But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal this book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase." Now, what's fascinating about this is like what we just got done talking about, is that people know how to respond now. People are all upset. People don't know how to think anymore. And so when something tragic happens in their life, they turn to the world rather than turning to Christ. And so that is a form of knowledge shall increase. People are learning how to respond the incorrect way. And so this is really fascinating to think about this, because obviously this has all kinds of ties and implications with AI and technology that's on a crazy advancement right now. But this is also something I want you to pay attention to. Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. What's so fascinating about this is that now you and I here in 2025 can read the book of Daniel. We can understand it, which is also a little hint or a little nod that we are in the time of the end, because we can understand it. We can decipher it. We know what was being said back then, which was probably a mystery to many people before us. So since you and I can understand the book of Daniel, now it seems we are in the time of the end, which also makes sense because you look back at the Doomsday Clock being 89 seconds. It's like, guys, I mean, that clock doesn't know anything, but it's just a sign of the time. It's just another drop in the bucket. And so I think that's just something to pay attention to. But all of these coupled together, it's drip, drip, drip. It's all of these things just being just an overflow of just all kinds of information coming to us. And it just all signs seem to be pointing to us being one day closer to home, because we actually are. Guys, the rapture could occur at any time. And if you don't know the Lord as your personal Savior, you need to get right with the Lord, because we could be standing before Him at any moment. Thanks, guys.